You probably think the apps on your phone are there because you put them there. But on most phones sold today, a meaningful share of the apps installed were never chosen by you at all. They arrived before you ever turned the device on. Some of them cannot be removed through normal means. And a portion of them exist for one purpose that has nothing to do with helping you, collecting information about you and selling it. By the end of this, you will understand exactly how these apps get onto your phone, who profits from each one, and how to find and remove the ones that are working against you rather than for you. Start with the apps that come pre-installed. The technical name is bloatware, but that word makes it sound accidental, like a manufacturing leftover. It isn't. Carriers receive payments, placement fees, or revenue share deals from app vendors in exchange for pre-installing their software or giving it prominent placement on the device. Phone manufacturers and carriers often receive direct payments from third-party developers to include their apps on new devices before the phone ever reaches a store shelf. The cheaper the phone, the more of these deals there tend to be, because thinner profit margins on lower-cost devices push manufacturers to lean harder on preloaded software for additional revenue. Here's where it gets more interesting. Many of these apps are not just preloaded. They are embedded at the system level, which means your phone treats them less like an app you installed and more like a permanent part of the operating system. Manufacturers often ship carrier-specific firmware builds with these apps baked directly into the system image before the phone leaves the factory, which complicates removal. In late 2020, I saw a phone maker that had built its entire brand identity around shipping 0 pre-installed apps released its newest device with 6 of them anyway. 3 could be uninstalled. 3, described internally as app installer and management utilities, could only be disabled, not removed. The company's own explanation was blunt. Pre-installing apps had become a business necessity. That's the pattern across the entire industry. The apps are not bugs. They are line items in a budget. But bloatware is the visible layer. Underneath it is something far less visible and far more consequential. The apps that exist specifically to harvest your data and sell it. To understand how big this is, you need to understand what regulators have actually found when they looked closely. In one of the largest enforcement actions of its kind, the Federal Trade Commission targeted a company called Gravy Analytics and its subsidiary Vental for collecting and selling billions of location data points harvested directly from smartphone apps. That data was precise enough to track individual people's visits to medical facilities, religious institutions, domestic violence shelters, and military installations. This wasn't a hypothetical privacy risk. Investigators found the company had used location data to build profiles based on political affiliation, attendance at religious worship, family composition, and medical conditions. The mechanism is almost mundane in how it works. Apps don't usually build their own spy tools. They embed a small piece of code called a software development kit, or SDK, that quietly collects a user's personal information and advertising identifiers and passes that data along during the routine process of buying and selling digital ad space. Every time an app shows you an ad, there's an invisible, instantaneous auction happening behind the scenes. And in that auction, advertisers are sometimes handed granular details like your location and personal characteristics just to decide whether to bid on showing you an advertisement. One data broker was found to have retained that information even after losing the auction, then resold it anyway. This is not a fringe problem involving a handful of disreputable companies. One broker collected more than 500 million unique advertising identifiers paired with precise, unanonymized location data, then sold access to that raw data to advertisers, other data brokers, and analytics firms, including location data from women who had visited pregnancy centers used to build advertising audiences targeting pregnant women. In a separate case, a company called Arity embedded tracking code into popular apps, including, of all things, life insurance and roadside assistance apps, to quietly collect driving behavior and sell it to insurance companies who used it to help set people's premiums. What most people don't realize is that the apps doing this collecting often look completely ordinary. A flashlight app, a weather widget, a simple game. The app itself might be free, functional, and harmless on the surface, while the SDK buried inside it does the actual work of extraction. You are not the customer of these apps. You are the product being measured, packaged, and sold to whoever is willing to pay for access to your habits. Regulators have started pushing back hard. In one recent case, the FTC prohibited a data broker from selling sensitive location data without consumers' explicit, affirmative consent after the agency alleged that the company had sold location data from hundreds of millions of mobile devices capable of tracing individual people's movements, including visits to health facilities and places of worship. But that's only part of the story. Enforcement actions can ban a handful of companies. They cannot rewrite the underlying economics that made this industry profitable in the first place. The data broker industry includes hundreds of companies, and enforcement can only ever reach a fraction of them at any given time. Pre-installed apps and data brokers are one vector. There are several others, and most people have never been told to look for any of them. The first is something most users wouldn't even think to question: operating system updates. Apple and Google periodically push first-party apps directly onto your device through routine software updates. These aren't installed through the App Store, where you'd see a download prompt. They simply appear after an update completes, already there, as if they had always been part of the phone. The second is app bundling, and this is where things become more deceptive. When you install one app, that installer sometimes brings along additional software that you never separately agreed to. The terms are usually disclosed, but buried inside lengthy permission text that almost nobody reads in full before tapping accept. The third is permission creep, and this is the vector that catches even careful users off guard. An app you installed months or years ago, one that asked for reasonable limited permissions at the time, can quietly expand what it has access to through routine updates. The app doesn't ask you again in any meaningful way. The update simply ships with broader access baked in, and unless you specifically go back and check, you'd never know your photo editor now wants your contacts, or your weather app now wants your microphone. The fourth vector is more unsettling because it weaponizes a legitimate corporate tool. Mobile device management profiles, or MDM, were built so that companies and schools could remotely manage devices they issue to employees and students, pushing security updates, enforcing passcodes, wiping a lost device. That's a reasonable, even necessary capability. But bad actors also use these same configuration profiles for monitoring purposes, since an installed MDM profile can reveal a device's location and other personal data to whoever controls it. This is one of the more dangerous blind spots on iPhone specifically, because Apple's strict security model otherwise makes it genuinely difficult for unauthorized surveillance software to gain the deep system access it would need. But a configuration profile installed with just a few minutes of physical access to an unlocked device sidesteps that protection entirely. This is where the safety stakes become real. Researchers estimate that around 1.5 million Americans are stalked through some form of technology every year, and the most common method involves surreptitious location tracking through a device's own GPS. Half of domestic violence service providers report that abusers use phone apps specifically to track their partners. Some of this software disguises itself as parental monitoring or employee tracking tools to maintain plausible deniability while regulators and app stores try to catch up. The Federal Trade Commission has started treating this seriously, having permanently banned at least one stalkerware company and its CEO from ever operating in that business again. If any of this sounds like it could describe your own situation, a partner or ex who seems to know things about your location or conversations that they shouldn't. The most important thing to understand is that the response here is different from a normal privacy cleanup. Multiple safety organizations are consistent on this point. Removing monitoring software the moment you discover it can alert the person who installed it, and in an abusive relationship that can escalate the danger rather than end it. If you're in that situation, talk to a domestic violence advocate or hotline before you start deleting anything so you can build a safety plan first. That single step matters more than any technical fix in this video. The fifth vector is the one that should worry casual users the most because it requires no relationship and no targeting at all, just a download. These are apps with hidden functions, something that presents itself as a photo editor, a PDF scanner, a battery saver, while running background processes that have nothing to do with the advertised feature. The interface looks legitimate, the icon looks legitimate, the reviews might even be legitimate. But behind that interface sits a process quietly logging activity, harvesting device identifiers, or reaching out to a remote server you'll never see named anywhere in the app's description. Now to the categories you should treat as a blanket warning sign, regardless of brand or download count. RAM boosters and battery optimizers on modern smartphones are functionally obsolete. Both Android and iOS have managed memory and power automatically for years. These apps don't speed anything up. They just run their own background process that uses the resources it claims to be saving. Free VPN apps deserve particular suspicion, and the data backs this up directly. One analysis found that 88% of the top 100 free Android VPNs leaked user data. A separate study of 800 free VPN apps across both platforms found that a quarter of the iOS apps lacked the privacy disclosure Apple requires, and more than 6% requested permissions meant only for system-level software. Access no third-party app should ever legitimately have. Here's why the incentive runs this way. Running a real VPN service costs real money for servers, bandwidth, and engineering. And when the user isn't paying any of that in cash, the revenue has to come from somewhere else, usually the user's own data. It's telling that Google removed 1.75 million malicious apps from its store in a single year, with a significant share of them being exactly this category of free utility and VPN app. Not every free VPN is malicious. A small number of reputable providers run genuinely audited free tiers as a way to convert users to paid plans later. but the overwhelming default assumption with an unknown free VPN should be skepticism, not trust. Third-party keyboards round out this category, and they deserve special attention because of where they sit on your device. A keyboard, by definition, processes everything you type. Every password, every message, every search. Installing a third-party keyboard means accepting that the developer collects and stores the text you type, with most offering little detail beyond a vague reference to encryption. Security researchers analyzing dozens of these apps found that they consistently request far more permissions than a keyboard would ever need to function. And a 2024 academic study found critical keystroke exposure vulnerabilities in 8 out of 9 major keyboard apps tested, with a combined reach of up to 1 billion users. The platforms themselves know how serious this is. Apple explicitly warns users before granting a third-party keyboard full access that the developer is then permitted to access, collect, and transmit everything typed. So now you know what to look for. Here's how to actually find it. On Android, open Settings and look for Security and Privacy, then Privacy Dashboard. This shows a visual breakdown of which apps accessed your camera, microphone, and location over the past 24 hours, with a 7-day view available as well. If something unexpected shows up there, a banking app pulling location data it doesn't need, or an app you barely use accessing your microphone, that's worth investigating immediately. Beyond the dashboard, go into the Permission Manager, usually found under the same security and privacy menu, and go category by category: location, camera, microphone, contacts, photos. For each one, look at exactly which apps are marked allowed versus allowed all the time, and revoke anything that doesn't have an obvious reason for that level of access. While you're in there, run a Google Play Protect scan from your security settings. It won't catch everything, but it's a fast first pass. On iPhone, the audit looks a little different because Apple's permission system is structured differently. Go to Settings, then Privacy and Security, scroll down, and turn on App Privacy Report if it isn't already active. This shows you which apps accessed your data and when. Then go through Settings and Apps individually, checking each app's toggles for camera, microphone, contacts, and location, and turning off anything that isn't essential to that app's actual function. And specifically, this is the step almost nobody knows to take. Go to Settings, then General, then VPN and Device Management. If you see a configuration profile listed there that you didn't set up yourself and you're not on a company-issued or school-issued device, that profile should be treated as a serious red flag. You can tap it to review what it has access to and remove it. For both platforms, treat your keyboard the same way you treat a password manager, with suspicion toward anything unfamiliar. If you've installed a third-party keyboard you don't fully trust, the simplest fix is reverting to your phone's default manufacturer-supplied keyboard, which undergoes far more scrutiny than an obscure app from an unverified developer. None of this requires technical expertise. It requires about 20 minutes and a willingness to actually look. What you'll likely find when you go through this process is that your phone has quietly been working for several other parties at once this whole time. The manufacturer who got paid to preload an app you never open, the data broker who's been buying access to your location through an SDK hidden inside something you do use, and possibly an app whose only real function was the one nobody told you about. None of that is inevitable. It's the result of specific business decisions made by specific companies, each one profitable, each one quietly normalized because almost no one ever checks. Now you know where to look. The next 20 minutes are the difference between a phone that works for you and one that's been working for everyone else.